My name is Isla Harper. That night, I walked out of the Reed estate gates in a downpour, with the engagement ring pulled off my finger in front of everyone. Not because I had done anything wrong, but because his mother said I was not worthy of wearing the family heirloom. He said nothing. No defense. No hand reaching out to stop me. I once believed this was the man I would build a life with. But who would have thought a single dinner could reveal the truth that brutally? Have you ever been rejected because of where you came from, your past, or the work you chose? If my story feels familiar in any way, leave a comment, hit like, and subscribe to the channel. Because what comes next, you won't be able to look away. The Reed woman didn't know. I once saved someone they had cast aside. And that person changed everything. I used to believe I was born from a void. No family photos on the wall, no stories about when I took my first steps or said my first words. Just a brief note in the file. Baby girl named Isla Ward. Mother missing, no information on father. I grew up bouncing between foster homes in Iowa. Each stop was like a temporary train station. Different caregivers, different beds, but the same lingering sense of being left behind. Other kids had relatives visit on weekends. I counted days hoping someone would say my name like they knew it. That never happened. In my memory, my mother was a mess of tangled brown curls, a soft lullaby at midnight, a rushed hug on the porch before she vanished like wind. They said she had mental health issues. Some said she ran from debt. Others claimed an accident. But no one knew for sure. And after a few years, no one asked anymore. Except for one person. June Ashford. A silver-haired volunteer with a frame smaller than her purse. She came every Saturday bringing fabric scraps, thread, and homemade ginger cookies. Every week I looked forward to her more than my own birthday. She never asked if I missed my mom. Never promised to adopt me. She simply sat beside me, listening as I stitched stories into tangled thread on worn cloth. Then one day she stopped coming. The staff said she had a heart condition and was hospitalized long-term. No one told me where she was. No phone number. No address. And like my mother, she disappeared. Later I was transferred to my final group home. No cookies. No bedtime stories. But there was Sister Agatha, a stern nun who let me use the convent's old sewing machine. On those long silent nights I taught myself to cut, piece, sew, undo. I taught myself to cut, piece, sew, undo. To fix a crooked seam. Or simply to keep my hands from trembling. Agatha didn't talk much, but every time I finished a tiny dress for a statue's wedding ceremony, she'd smile and say, "This girl knows how to make something good from what others throw away." I aged out of the system at 18. Left with one battered suitcase, a notebook of self-drafted sewing patterns, and one quiet vow: I would never let myself be forgotten again. I started at a second-hand repair shop, then moved to a small bridal boutique on the north side of Columbus. Most clients came in with worn-out dresses in need of altering, and that's when I learned the most important thing. Not everyone needs a brand new gown. Sometimes they need someone who sees the tears. That's where I met Nathaniel Reed. He walked in like the air shifted around him. His tailored suit had a small tear in the sleeve, and I was asked to fix it in 2 hours. I bent over to measure, safety pins in my mouth, and he stood still, phone in hand, but eyes on me. "You're the one who reworked my sister's wedding dress last month, right?" He added. "She said she's never had anyone understand her shape like Isla Harper did." We talked a few more minutes. He asked where I trained. I told the truth. In a convent. Nathaniel didn't laugh. Instead, he tilted his head, intrigued, as if that made me more interesting, not less. And just as I was about to return the suit, he held out his hand. "Lunch? I'd love to know more about the woman who saved my Armani jacket." I declined. 3 times. But the 4th time he showed up at the shop with a hot coffee on a cold, rainy morning, I said yes. Nathaniel carried the posture of a man raised to be kind. He listened. He let me speak. And most importantly, he complimented me in a way that didn't feel like pity. Part of me thought, maybe I wasn't too broken to be loved after all. I believed it so much that when he said, "It's time for you to meet my mom. She's tough, but I know she'll love you," I trusted him more than I trusted my own instincts. What I didn't know was that Clarissa Reed had known about me for a long time. And that dinner wasn't a welcome. It was a test. I still remember the way the rings sparkled under the chandelier as Clarissa Reed raised her wine glass. She looked at me, her smile thinner than the shade of her deep red lipstick, and tilted her head like she was making a casual observation. That ring, it belonged to Nathaniel's grandmother. It's a family heirloom. But I'm not sure it suits the finger of a girl who doesn't even know who her parents are. Her words landed like a blade, cold, deliberate, slicing through each layer of my dignity. I froze. Even lifting my fork felt impossible, as if the whole meal had lodged itself in my throat. But the worst part wasn't her cold eyes. It was Nathaniel's silence. I turned to him, hoping for a hand, a word, anything. But he stared at his wine glass, fingers tapping the stem like background music to the scene. Then he stood. Calm. Measured. As if following a script. He walked behind me. Not rushed. Not hesitant. "You should take it off," he said so softly I thought I misheard. But then his hand reached mine. Firm, decisive, not tender. The ring, the one I had cherished for 2 weeks since he gave it to me, was removed with a single twist. "I think it's better we save it for the right person," Nathaniel said. I wanted to ask, who is the right person? But nothing came out. There was no reason to stay. The napkin slipped from my lap to the floor, a final note in the silence. I don't remember how I left the room. How many steps from the dining table across the cold stone hallway to the massive wooden doors. I only know that when the night air hit my face I realized I was trembling. It had started raining, not heavy but enough to melt the makeup I'd tried so hard to keep intact during dinner. Someone ran after me as I neared the gate. "Miss Isla, you forgot your coat." I didn't look back. What I didn't know was that right after I left, Clarissa turned to the estate manager and said in a chillingly casual tone, "Delete all the dining room footage from tonight. No need to give the media anything to play with." The manager nodded and pulled out his phone immediately. And me, I was walking across the rain-slicked stone path, heels screeching softly with every step, clutching my purse like it was the last scrap of dignity I had left. A low rumble of thunder tore through the sky. And I realized, it wasn't the rain falling, it was the last layer of defense in me breaking down. I didn't know how far I had walked. Didn't know how many warm-porched houses I'd passed, or how many eyes had watched me drenched, like I was some stray who didn't belong. One path led home. The other, I didn't know. Maybe anywhere they weren't. I used to think I had nothing to lose. I was wrong. I had lost my final illusion. Lost the belief that if I tried hard enough, loved deep enough, lived kindly enough, I would be accepted. But the truth is, they saw me clearly. And they still chose to make me disappear. I thought everything would end when the Reed estate gate closed behind me. 2 days later, while I was mending a wedding dress scorched by an overheated iron, I heard the phone ring, sharp, relentless. When I picked up, Fiona, the owner of the boutique where I worked, sounded tense. "Isla, you need to go online right now. Something's happened." I unlocked my phone, heart pounding. My personal page, usually filled with wedding dresses, pins and thread, and a few snapshots of smiling clients, was now buried in hundreds of comments. A video barely a minute long, filmed secretly from the dinner table, was spreading like wildfire. In it, Clarissa's cold voice rang out. "A family heirloom like this doesn't belong on the finger of a girl who doesn't even know who her parents are." Then Nathaniel's voice, "Probably best to save it, for the right person." The video's title read, "Orphan Seamstress aimed too high, and got put in her place at the billionaire's table." I didn't know who had secretly filmed it. Maybe a cousin or relative of Nathaniel. Someone who thrived on gossip or worse, craved attention. But that no longer mattered. I became a national joke overnight. The comments came fast. "She climbed too high. Deserved that fall. Shameless. Seamstresses should know their place. Gotta admit she's a decent actress. Look at that dramatic tear-holding moment like it's a soap opera." Order cancellations poured into the boutique by the hour. One client who had ordered 3 custom bridesmaid dresses called to demand a refund, even though I'd finished 70%. She didn't say why, but I knew. 2 days later, Fiona called me into her office, her hand resting on a pile of cancelled orders. Her eyes were heavy. "I don't want to do this, Isla. You're the best I've ever had. But the studio's under too much pressure. Our investors are threatening to pull out because of the hit to our reputation." She handed me a pay envelope and said softly, If you need someone to vouch for your integrity, I will. For the job. I can't protect it anymore. I walked out of the studio carrying my bag of scissors, fabric, and the last few spools of thread I owned. That day it didn't rain. But inside me a storm was building. I locked the door to my small rented apartment, turned on the water heater, but didn't have the strength to step into the shower. I sat on the kitchen floor, head resting on my knees, hands still clutching a piece of unfinished lace. The scent of singed fabric lingered. For the first time in years, I let myself cry out loud. It wasn't the humiliation. It wasn't even the loss of my job. It was the sinking ache of being thrown back to where I started. A place where no one needed me and nothing felt worth holding on to. The phone rang as I was about to turn it off. A landline flashed on the screen. Mercy General Hospital. I hesitated, then picked up. Hi, is this Isla Ward? The nurse's voice continued, soft and gentle. We have an elderly patient who was just admitted. She asked us to contact Isla Ward. Isla would know who she is. My hands trembled. Isla Ward was my birth name. The name I dropped at 18 because I didn't want to be tied to a rootless past. I asked, almost automatically, what's her name? She was admitted under the alias Dorothy Miller, but just revealed her real name is June Ashford. She said, you used to sew doll dresses from scrap fabric by the group home window in 2005. My entire body felt pulled into a wind of memory. A breeze carrying the scent of ginger cookies, the whisper of thread, and the smile of a silver-haired woman. The first person who ever looked at me not with pity but with trust. I got to the hospital almost without realizing how. The hall smelled of disinfectant, the fluorescent lights dim and cold, but my heart pounded like I was walking toward a memory I once thought was a dream. The door to room 208B was ajar. I stepped inside. Lying there on oxygen was a frail elderly woman, her silver hair neatly tied, her skin folded like creased paper. But when she opened her eyes, those eyes hadn't changed. You came, she whispered. My Isla. I burst into tears. June Ashford, the one person who had ever made me believe I was worth something, was still alive. And while the whole world pushed me out, she had called me by the truest name I had. The name of the little girl who once stitched dolls with her on Saturday afternoons. I held her hand, still warm though much weaker. You know who I am, I whispered. She nodded slowly. I never forgot you. And this time, I won't disappear. I left Columbus on a fall morning, carrying exactly 3 things. A worn cloth suitcase, a sewing kit, and a hospital document labeled Temporary Family Caregiver. The bus ride south to Kentucky took nearly 8 hours, winding through misty hills and yellowing cornfields at the edge of the season. I sat in silence, watching my reflection blur in the window. Isla Harper, the city girl, had been stripped bare in the public eye. But Isla Ward, the name I once buried, was being called again with warmth. June met me at the bus stop in a faded blue pickup truck. She didn't ask much, waved and said, you still look like that little girl, except now your eyes don't believe in magic anymore. Her house sat on the edge of a small town called Liberty Springs, a 2-story wooden cottage wrapped in ivy, paint faded white, a wide porch with an old wooden swing. Inside, everything was simple but meticulously kept. Black and white photos in wooden frames, hand-embroidered lampshades, and the smell of cornbread baking in the kitchen. Folks here call me Dot. Grandma lives alone with a fat cat named King George. But you know, June winked, a fake name helps you survive. Doesn't mean I ever forgot who I am. I set my bag down on the creaky wooden floor. Not even a full day had passed, but something already felt lighter. Maybe because I'd finally stepped into a place where no one knew me as the seamstress who reached too high. That night, after a dinner of soft bean stew and warm cornbread, June took me up to the attic. There's something I've held on to for a long time. Now it's time to return it to where it belongs. She turned on the light. A vintage Singer sewing machine sat in the corner, covered with a white cloth. I gently touched its chipped paint, my fingers tracing the worn ridges of time. This was your mother's sewing machine. She left it with me the night she ran. No one believed me when I said she wasn't crazy. They only looked at the records, at the documents her husband signed. You know how it goes. When powerful men speak, they're always believed. I turned to her, eyes wide. June pulled an old tin box from the wooden drawer. Inside were faded photographs, a few handwritten letters, and a copy of a hospital report. My hands trembled as I opened each page. In red ink at the top of one was a note. Emotionally unstable, prone to agitation, requires long-term observation. Below it, a messy signature. Raymond Ashford. He was your mother's stepfather and he's the one who had her committed, June said slowly. And after that, he disappeared with full guardianship. I sank down onto the wooden floor, the paper trembling in my hands. I had spent my whole life believing my mother had either run away or died in an accident. But the truth was, her identity had been erased. As if her existence had never mattered enough to be verified. June came over and rested her hand on my shoulder as she lowered herself beside me. I've kept these things for 20 years, never dared hand them to anyone. But you're different, Isla. You have the right to rewrite your story. I didn't say anything. But that night, after June had fallen asleep, I sat alone by the sewing machine, my hands tracing each cold curve of its iron body. It didn't hum like it used to, but I could feel the warmth in every thread I'd stitched when I was 10. I pulled out my old design notebook, flipped through its yellowed pages, then reached into my bag for fabric and needle. Not to make wedding dresses. There were no more orders. I was sewing for myself. A small, cream-colored tablecloth. I used deep red thread to embroider the first words, Ward Maid. That name was a blend of my real last name and the journey I was about to stitch with my own 2 hands. I didn't do it to prove anything to the world. Only to remind myself that I was still whole. I created a social media account under the name Wardmaid and posted a photo of the first cloth with a simple caption. A seamstress with no place left in the city, stitching her life back together in a town where no one knows her name. I kept my name private. Never mentioned where I lived. What I did share were the quiet steps behind each creation. A towel from old scraps, a bag from torn jeans, a nightgown stitched with care. Each day after caring for June, I sat on the porch, the camera propped up on the table, filming each stitch, each line of thread, each quiet smile between birdsong and the smell of fallen leaves. And surprisingly, people started to watch. A quiet account, no ads, no flash, but each video drew thousands of likes. Someone wrote, I used to be a seamstress, lost my job, but watching you so makes me want to try again. Another said, I've been struggling with depression. But seeing your hands move with that needle calms me down. I couldn't reply to them all. But I read every word. And for the first time I didn't feel like the one cast out. I was someone building a home again, with thread, memory, and a new kind of quiet. One early winter morning, while I was sorting through a pile of fabric scraps on the porch, June brought out a cup of hot tea, set it gently on the table and sat down beside me. Wardmaids being shared on big pages again, she smiled, rubbing her aching knee. Good things do travel far. I nodded, thanked her. But something inside me wouldn't settle. For days I'd felt it, that strange stillness, like a storm was approaching but the sky hadn't broken yet. That feeling was justified. That afternoon I received a message from Dylan Avery, the only friend from my journalism days who still kept in touch. He had interned at the Columbus Ledger back when I was sewing dresses for local media events. Isla. Nitirok. Urgent. Less than 5 minutes later my phone rang. I stepped into the backyard to take it, scissors and fabric still in hand. Where are you? Dylan asked right away. I'm fine. Staying with someone I know in Kentucky. What's going on? Dylan lowered his voice like he was afraid someone might be listening. Do you know what's happening with the Reed family? Honestly, I'd been avoiding all news related to them. Their foundation, Golden Sun, is under investigation for money laundering and real estate manipulation. Treasury and the FBI are involved. I clenched my apron strap. Clarissa Reed's being held for questioning, suspected of funneling money overseas under the guise of charity. I didn't know what I felt, satisfaction, anger, or relief. But the only thing that came up clearly was one question. Where was Nathaniel in all this? Dylan seemed to read my mind. Your golden boy went on livestream yesterday. Crying. Said his mom was being framed. But the internet isn't buying it. There's a comment with thousands of likes. You couldn't even defend your girlfriend at dinner. Now you want us to believe you can defend your mother from the government. I closed my eyes. But listen, this is why I'm really calling. There's another reporter, Henry Blackwell, digging into your old records. He's infamous for using personal dirt to distract from major scandals. Me? Yeah. He's been asking around the old group home. About your mother. About your background. Sounds like the Reeds are trying to spin your unknown origins into a counterattack, painting you as some manipulative fraud who seduced Nathaniel. I gripped the phone tighter. Dylan, I need a favor. If he really gets to my mom, or rather to those forged psychiatric files, I need to know first. Absolutely. But Isla, this time if you're going to fight back you need to speak up. No more silence. I nodded even though he couldn't see me. After the call I went straight inside, up the stairs and opened June's fabric cabinet. Beneath layers of old silk, I pulled out the tin box containing everything related to my mother that June had once given me. There were photos. Handwritten letters. The diagnosis signed under pressure. She once said, I whispered as June entered the room, the truth if untold will be written by someone else. She eased down beside me, her fingers resting gently on the lid of the box. That's right. And this time you're not alone, Isla. Outside, a soft rain began to fall. The sound of droplets hitting the tin roof mixed with the rhythm of my heart shifting. It was no longer the rhythm of someone hiding. It was the rhythm of someone preparing to step into the light, with a story the world had tried to bury for 20 years. I didn't know how the public would treat me, but I wasn't afraid anymore. And if they wanted to dig up the past, I would show them every stitch, every scrap, every tear I had sewn back together. I remained in the dressing room of the TV studio for over 10 minutes, never reaching for the makeup in front of me. The nameplate on the table read clearly, Ward, artist storyteller. Ward. My mother's last name. The name of a child unacknowledged by the system. Of a woman rebuilding herself with thread and memory. The host entered, smile polite, eyes slightly cautious. We're grateful you agreed to come on. You don't have to name anyone specifically. Just tell the story in your own words. When the stage lights came on, I stepped forward into the gaze of millions watching through their screens. Thank you for having me. I'm not famous. I'm not an expert. I don't speak for anyone but myself. I used to believe that if I worked hard, behaved properly and lived decently, the world would accept me, regardless of where I came from, how much I had or who my family was. I could hear the audience shifting slightly, a kind of silence filled with attention. But then one day I was invited to dinner. At that table, white linens, expensive wine, I was asked who my parents were, what I did for a living, where I went to school. And then the man I thought loved me removed the ring from my finger and said, I wasn't worthy. The auditorium went so quiet I could hear the hum of the ceiling vents. I continued. It wasn't about the ring. Or the silence. It was about how this society still defines a person's worth. By where they were born, who their parents are, how many degrees they hold, how much money they make, and how well they fit into a family photo. I looked straight into the camera. And me? I grew up in foster care. My mother didn't go missing like people claimed. She was institutionalized by her own family. The man who signed her away labeled her unstable. Her name was erased from legal records. And with it, her dignity, her humanity, and her right to be a mother. June was in the front row, hands clasped tightly. Her hands clasped tightly. I knew she was holding her heart steady. I'm not telling this story to gain pity. I'm telling it to ask a question. How many of us have ever been told we're not good enough? Simply because we didn't come from the right place, didn't know the right people, didn't fit into the right mold. A slow round of applause rose from somewhere in the back of the auditorium. Then it spread. I ended my talk with one line. I'm a seamstress with no pedigree. But I know every stitch that held me together, and I believe there are millions like me still sitting in the dark, quietly mending their own wounds. Less than an hour after the broadcast, social media exploded. From an anonymous name, Ward, became the center of online discussion. People started piecing details together. Was she the girl humiliated at the Reed dinner? Who is her mother? Was her mother really institutionalized based on forged paperwork? An independent investigative channel called True Trace Files jumped in. And in 3 days they uncovered the truth. Ashgrove Mental Facility once admitted a woman named Lucille Ward, with records stating signs of paranoia after accusing her husband of financial abuse and threats to strip custody. But what was strange? The admittance form was signed by her legal guardian, my mother's ex-husband who also happened to be Raymond Ashford, my biological father, a man I had never seen. Signing as her medical proxy, he turned my mother into someone voiceless. For 20 years, no one asked if she wanted to speak, because all the documents said her voice was a symptom. True Trace Files published the full records, including images of her patient file, guardianship papers, and an internal hospital review indicating signs of external coercion. This time the internet didn't stay quiet. A viral campaign under the hashtag #HerVoiceCounts erupted. Many other women shared stories of guardianship abuse, legal silencing, and many mention me, not as the seamstress who aimed too high, but as Isla Ward, the one who dared tell her mother's story when others tried to bury it forever. I wasn't a hero. I wasn't a victim. I was simply a daughter, who chose not to bow when the world called her out of place. I knew he would come. From the moment my real identity surfaced after the talk show, I sensed it. Partly because I understood Nathaniel, he always waited for the right moment to do the right thing, usually too late. And partly because I had once been the person he could return to whenever the world felt unmanageable. And this time was no different. That morning, I was hanging newly dyed fabric on the porch after a night of rain when the familiar silver Lexus pulled up to June's white wooden gate. I wasn't surprised. Nathaniel stepped out wearing a gray shirt, no tie, his face visibly thinner. His eyes still carried that familiar blend of confusion and tension, the look I'd seen so many times before, right before he tried to explain something away. "Isla," he said, standing outside the gate. I didn't walk toward him. I kept pinning fabric to the line. Carefully. Slowly. He stepped through after I didn't stop him. Only when he stood in front of me, on the small lawn surrounded by ivy-covered fences, did he speak again. "I know. I have no right to be here. But I need to talk to you. Just once. If you'll let me." I pulled off my fabric gloves, laid them gently on the wooden table and looked him in the eye. "I'm listening." Nathaniel swallowed hard. His hands laced together. His throat moved like he was trying to force down all the confusion in his chest. "I was wrong, Isla. I let my mother manipulate things for far too long. I thought staying silent would make it all blow over. That you'd understand. But I see now, my silence hurt you more than any words ever could. I was scared. I didn't know what it meant to stand up to my mother. I thought maybe you'd forgive me. Maybe I'd have a chance to make it right later. But I let you walk away, and I didn't follow. When I stood up and walked away from that dinner table, why didn't you come after me?" Nathaniel looked down. That question, short and quiet, hit him right where he feared most. Because that was the moment I had waited for, hoped for, even silently begged for. A gesture to stop me. A call. But there was nothing. I didn't know. I thought I needed to stay calm. To keep face, for my mother, for me, for you. But now I know, the only thing I should have tried to keep was you. I walked back to the wooden table, poured myself a cup of tea, then said slowly, "You're not a bad person, Nathaniel. But you're the kind of person who stands backstage when the spotlight gets too hot. And I'm done living as a supporting character." He looked up, eyes glistening. "So, you can't forgive me?" I shook my head. "Forgiveness. I forgave you a long time ago. Forgiveness wasn't for you. It was how I chose peace." Nathaniel stood still. "But coming back?" I continued. "I'm not that woman anymore. The one who was afraid to lose you. Who thought her worth depended on being chosen by you. You know who never left me? June. The woman who stayed when I was nothing but a patchwork. And the second person was me." A breeze swept through, making the fabric pieces flutter. In the small yard, the colors swayed like memories coming to life, torn raw but slowly stitching themselves together. Nathaniel nodded slightly. "I understand." I knew he meant it. But that understanding, like his apology, was no longer enough to bring me back. He turned away, paused at the gate. I didn't follow. And he didn't look back. When his car engine started and faded down the road, I returned to the sewing table, threading the needle again. The new studio sat on the corner where two quiet streets met in Lexington, Kentucky, a place not crowded, but filled with craft stores, family cafes, and used bookstores. Outside, a wooden sign hung against the red brick wall with a single hand-carved line, "Ward made, we mend stories." I never imagined I'd one day have a space of my own. A studio with sunlit windows, warm wooden floors, and fabric shelves in every tone of light. But when an offer came into the ward-made inbox from the design house Emberlace, I knew I couldn't turn away. "We don't want a celebrity designer," their rep wrote. "We want someone who knows how to listen to every thread in a life." We started with a simple idea. A bridal line designed specifically for women who had been dismissed, who had survived violence, divorce, or grief. No ideal mold. No standard sizing. Each dress was a story, tailored to the life of the woman wearing it. I didn't work alone. There was Camila, once a cutter in New Orleans, who left her abusive husband with her 4-year-old son. There was Lena, a single mother from Guatemala, a burn survivor who had to relearn sewing with her left hand after her right was badly injured in a fire. We didn't talk much about the past. But each stitch, each seam, each time we altered a bodice because a client cried when she saw herself in the mirror, was a quiet form of understanding. We weren't altering dresses. We were mending trust. Wardmade began to appear in craft magazines, then local media, and eventually earned a small feature in Vogue Living. This isn't fashion. It's where women once forgotten learned to face the mirror again with straight backs and shining eyes. One day in February, I received a call from a social agency in Louisville, the same one I had quietly funded to offer training scholarships for girls in foster care. "There's a new girl at the shelter. No relatives. Very quiet, but shows a deep interest in sewing machines." The voice on the line continued. "We saw her replaying ward-made videos over and over. She keeps calling the woman in the videos, the quiet lady who stitches the world back together." I arrived at the center on a lightly snowy afternoon. She was sitting alone at the far table in the common room. Dark eyes, shoulder-length hair, carefully folding a piece of light blue felt. She didn't smile. Didn't greet me. But when I stepped closer, she looked up. "Are you real?" I nodded. She stared at me for a long time, then whispered, "I don't have a real name. They gave me Emma for now. If you could choose, what name would you want?" She stayed quiet, then softly whispered, "June." "Why June?" "I don't know. Feels like the name of someone who doesn't leave." I couldn't hold it in. I reached out and lightly touched the back of her small hand. That night, I filled out the adoption papers with one trembling italic line. New name of child, June Ward. When Grandma June heard the news, she sat silently for a long time in the chair by the window. I thought she was against it. But then she turned to me, eyes misty. "My granddaughter isn't an abandoned child. She's proof that the world can heal. And the name June, it's not a memory anymore. It's something that lives on." Little June slowly adjusted, though she still spoke little. She often sat in the corner of the studio, playing with leftover thread, scribbling with colored pencils, or quietly watching me work, her eyes unusually serious for a 5-year-old. One afternoon, I was measuring fabric for a client, a woman in her 40s who had survived 15 years of an abusive marriage, when June came over holding a crumpled piece of lace. "This one's torn, but I think it can still be beautiful." I looked up and smiled. "What are you going to do with it?" "I'll stitch it, but I won't hide the tear. I'll use gold thread, so people can see it was hurt, but it's still here." Her words froze me in place. The client in the fitting room clutched her chest, then burst into tears. "We kept that piece of lace, framed it in wood and hung it on the studio wall. Under the frame was a line June wrote herself in wax pencil, 'No tear is shameful.' I look at that frame every morning before I start work. It reminds me that the past doesn't need to be erased. It needs to be faced, honored, and stitched back together with the gentleness we choose to give it." The room was filled with afternoon sunlight. Light streamed through the sheer lace curtains, casting dappled shadows across the long wooden tables draped with soft, wrinkled linen. Needles threaded with colored strings lay quietly on thick fabric, next to a half-cooled cup of chamomile tea. It was the final session of the monthly Healing Through Fabric workshop I held at the studio, a place where no one needed to explain their job, where they lived, or why they came. All that mattered was that there was something in them that needed mending. Today there were 8 women of all ages. The youngest was Lily, a college student who had quietly dropped out after an abortion. The oldest was Ms. Lorna, a retired teacher who had spent 27 years in a voiceless marriage. We gathered in a circle, each holding a thick piece of cotton, stitching what we called a scar. I watched the threads form across fabric. Bold zigzags, broken lines reconnected with bright colors, large patches like the kind in memory. A long while later, after the soft piano background music faded, Lily was the first to speak. Her voice was barely above a whisper, as if afraid to disturb something fragile. "Miss Isla, I know I shouldn't ask, but have you ever wanted revenge?" All eyes turned to me. No one expected an easy answer. They wanted the truth, the way they were slicing into fabric to see inside themselves. "Yes," I replied evenly. "Many times. I've imagined exposing every name, every address, every cruelty I once endured. I've pictured the public turning on them, the same way they once made me lose everything." The room went still. "But then, I realized there are things bigger than revenge," I continued, my gaze resting softly on the fabric I was still stitching. "Like hearing a child call me mom for the first time. Or seeing the face of a woman standing in front of the mirror, in the first dress she ever chose for herself, and whispering, 'I'm still beautiful.'" Lily lowered her head and threaded her needle again. "Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting," I said. "It means we're no longer letting the wounds lead us. It's like choosing to stitch a scar in gold, not to hide it, but to keep it as part of what we've lived through." Lorna gently placed her hand on my shoulder. "You don't know this," she said, "but I used to think I was only living until I died. And by stitching these broken lines, I remembered that I once knew how to love." The room returned to the soft sounds of thread sliding through fabric, the snip of scissors, the smell of wood and tea, and the quiet breaths of people allowing themselves to feel just a little lighter. Outside, June was playing with the neighbor's cat, giggling, holding a scrap of deep purple fabric she was still cutting. She looked up and saw me, waving her hand high in the air. I raised my hand in return, my chest suddenly warm to the point of aching. I once thought my ending was at that long dining table in that cold house. But it turns out the ending was a torn place waiting to be stitched. And I know that line of thread will carry me even further. Because every stitch I make today is part of a story that's being heard at the right time. Have you ever had a scar, not on your skin, but deep in your heart, one you needed years to look at again? I believe every one of us carries at least one such cut. Perhaps you were once dismissed because of where you came from. Or you stayed silent when you should have spoken up. Maybe, like me, you stood up from a place that offered no room and stitched yourself back together with your own hands. If you've ever felt that way, or if anything in my story made you pause, I hope you'll share your own. Leave a comment below. Because maybe the story you tell will give someone else the comfort they didn't know they were searching for. And if you believe stories of family, healing, and resilience still matter in today's world, don't forget to follow this channel and walk with me into the journeys ahead. Because some things are meant to be told, slowly, deeply, and right on time. We'll meet again. In another story. In a place where scars aren't hidden, but seen with nothing but love.